In the remote highlands of northern Ethiopia, there is a place where the earth does not simply end. It reaches for the throne of God. Here, in the Tigray mountains, the cliffs rise like jagged teeth against the sky, shrouded in clouds that move with the heavy grace of liturgical incense. This is a landscape where stone meets heaven, a vertical wilderness that has served as the world's most impenetrable sacred vault for nearly 2 millennia. Tied to these precipices like an eagle's nest is the Gunda Gunde Monastery. It is an altar of absolute silence, reachable only by those willing to scale the sheer face of the rock. For 17 centuries, the monks here have been the keepers of a secret that the rest of the world forgot, or perhaps was forced to forget. In the thinning air of late 2023, beneath the shadow of ancient timber beams, a leather satchel was unearthed. It was sealed with a gravity that suggested its contents were never meant for the eyes of empires. As the brittle ties were finally undone, a terrifying question emerged from the dust. What words were so dangerous they had to be hidden at the edge of the world? In the flickering amber of a single beeswax candle, the air in the Gunda Gunde scriptorium feels heavy, laden with the dust of 17 centuries. Dr. Alemayehu Bizune reaches for the leather satchel, his fingers trembling as he breaks a seal that has outlived empires. As the casing yields, a scent rises, not of decay, but of cedar and old earth. He carefully draws out the codex, and time itself seems to hold its breath. The parchment is unlike any he has touched. It is as thin as human skin, translucent and fragile, yet possessed of a haunting resilience. Its edges are dark, stained by the soot of 1,000 candles held by monks who read these words in secret while the rest of the world slept. As he unfolds the first folio, the Ge'ez characters leap from the page, inked in a black so deep it feels like a puncture in reality. Then he sees it. The title, inscribed in a precise, ancient hand. The hidden sayings of the Master to his chosen ones concerning the kingdom within. The silence in the room shatters. This is not a gospel of history or a list of laws. It is an intimate map of the soul. No such title exists in the official archives of Rome. While some might recognize certain aphorisms as belonging to the Gnostic tradition, reminiscent of the Nag Hammadi findings, the Gunda Gunde Codex represents a distinct, untainted lineage. It is not merely another copy of the Gospel of Thomas. It is a synthesis of that hidden tradition merged with a uniquely Ethiopian crystalline clarity. It implies that these dangerous secrets were not localized Egyptian cult beliefs, but a widespread, sophisticated theology that the Proto-Orthodox Church spent centuries trying to decapitate. Why were these specific words excised from the memory of the world, left to survive only here, at the jagged edge of the sky? In the shadows of Gunda Gunde, a fundamental shift occurs, a departure from the logic of the temple and the stone. For centuries, we were taught that the divine was a destination, a fortress reached only through the gatekeepers of the liturgy. But this manuscript breathes a different fire. It records Jesus speaking in the heavy, crystalline hours before his arrest, not to the masses in riddles or protective parables, but to his companions in the language of the soul. He speaks of an interiorized theology that feels like a ripple moving through a still mountain pool, radiating from the center of the self to the edges of the universe. You search for God in signs and horizons, the text reads. But I tell you truly, the kingdom is within you. This is not the Christ of the Great Commission. This is the mystic of the inner spark. These sayings echo the fragmented echoes of the Gospel of Thomas, found in the sands of Egypt. Yet here they are preserved in a liturgical Ge'ez context that suggests they were used as active monastic practice rather than discarded philosophy. It suggests that the kingdom isn't a political territory or a post-mortem reward, but a state of awareness, a divine ember buried beneath the ash of human ego. If the Creator is not housed in cathedrals of cedar and gold, but in the very marrow of the seeker, then the geography of faith changes forever. To understand how such a radical flame survived, one must understand the land that acted as its shield. To understand why these secrets breathe only here, you must understand the land that conspired to protect them. Ethiopia did not merely adopt the faith, she became its living fortress. While the Roman world was a theater of shifting borders and imperial decrees, the kingdom of Aksum was an island of stone in a sea of fire. The story begins not with a decree, but with a baptism. A royal official returning from Jerusalem carrying a spark that would ignite a continent. By the 4th century, King Ezana had carved the cross into his coinage and his heart, a full century before much of Europe had even heard the name of Christ. But as Western Christianity grew into an empire of cathedrals and councils, Ethiopia withdrew into the silence of its highlands. Here, faith was not built upward toward the sky, but downward into the very marrow of the world. At Lalibela, churches were hewn from the living rock, rising from the red earth like prehistoric giants. This isolation turned the mountains into a natural vault, a gargantuan stone ark for the words the rest of the world had forgotten. While the great library of Alexandria burned and the scrolls of the Levant turned to ash, what other secrets did these mountain monks transcribe in the dark? The search for the historical Jesus finds its most vital lead in the one place the empire couldn't reach. But faith alone cannot silence the skeptic. For the modern world, the spirit must be measured by the machine. In the sterile, white light laboratories of Oxford and Munich, the Gunda Gunde Manuscript was stripped of its mystery and subjected to the cold scrutiny of science. Carbon-14 dating did not find a medieval forgery or a pious imitation. It found a ghost. The parchment screamed out a date from the eye of the storm, between 350 and 450 CE. This was not a document of the established church. It was a fugitive from the century that redefined God. As linguists peeled back the layers of the Ge'ez script, they discovered the linguistic fingerprints of an even older ancestor. The syntax, the very skeleton of the sentences, echoed with the ghosts of lost Greek and Aramaic originals. This manuscript is a humble witness. There is no vanity here, no gold leaf to catch the sun, no vibrant pigments to distract the eye. It is written in the ink of the earth, black carbon, soot, and shadow. It is a voice crying out from a time when the word was still dangerous, still raw, and still unpolished by the hands of princes. As the laser scans the fibers of the page, a chilling realization emerges. This was not a casual copy. This was a labor of holy defiance. Who was the scribe who risked the fires of the Inquisitor to preserve these banned lines? Among the black ink lay a name that changes the hierarchy of heaven. The appearance of Mary Magdalene in this specific Ge'ez codex is not a mere repetition of her role in the Gnostic Gospels already known to us. In the previously discovered texts from Nag Hammadi, Mary is often a figure of dispute, her authority constantly challenged by Peter. However, in the Gunda Gunde Manuscript, her inclusion is treated not as a radical interruption, but as an established, undisputed theological fact. Her name appearing in a 4th century Ethiopian text, one used by a mainstream monastic community, reveals that the feminine divine wasn't a fringe sex secret, but a core pillar of the faith that was surgically removed during the Romanization of Christianity. In the cathedrals of the West, she has been a shadow, a witness at the tomb, a penitent in the dust, a figure reduced by the politics of men. But inside the Gunda Gunde codex, the shadow steps into the light. Imagine a mural where a woman stands in the center of the 12, her eyes not cast down in shame, but alight with the fire of direct realization. In these pages, the master does not speak to her as a secondary student. He calls her the one who understands. It is a title that shatters 17 centuries of ecclesiastical structure. In the world of this manuscript, discipleship is not a rank bestowed by gender or a position granted by appointment. It is a state of being defined by insight. While the others struggle with the weight of tradition and the fear of the coming storm, Mary is the one who grasps the marrow of the message, that the teacher is not a king to be served, but a mirror to be used. Jesus turns to her as an equal, a keeper of the flame, suggesting that the true lineage of his teaching passed through the heart of the one who saw him most clearly. If the history of the world had been built upon this Gaia's parchment, the suppression of the feminine would not have been a divine decree, but a political impossibility. The theology of the inner spark makes the exterior hierarchy obsolete. When the scholars at Gunda Gunde translated the lines concerning the kingdom within, they were not just reading poetry. They were unearthing a manifesto of spiritual revolution. In the eyes of the 4th century church fathers, these were the most dangerous words ever written. To understand why, you must look at the nature of power. An empire requires a gate, a key, and a guard. If salvation is a commodity bestowed only by a bishop, or a gift granted only through the rituals of a centralized cathedral, then the soul is a subject to be governed. But the Ethiopian manuscript whispers a terrifying alternative, that the divine is a reality to be remembered, not a favor to be earned. This interiorized theology causes the very foundations of institutional religion to crumble. If the light already burns within the marrow of the peasant and the slave, the need for an external bestower of grace vanishes. A self-realized soul cannot be commanded by imperial decree. A faith of internal awakening cannot be taxed, walled, or conscripted into the service of an emperor. While Rome was building a Vatican of stone and law to stabilize a fractured world, the monks of Ethiopia were preserving a faith that remained decentralized, mystical, and sovereign. They knew that when the spirit is found in the silence of the heart, the heavy iron gates of religious authority do not just open, they rust and fall from their hinges. Is salvation a gift given, or a reality remembered? As the light of the digital scans pierces the ancient Ge'ez characters, the manuscript does something more radical than just naming names. It shatters the very image of the cross. For 17 centuries, the Western world has been taught a theology of debt, an accounting of sin where the crucifixion was the final bloody payment. We were told to look at the wood and feel the crush of our own unworthiness. The Gunda Gunde Manuscript offers a different vision, one that feels less like a courtroom and more like a forge. In these pages, the cross is not a scaffold of execution, but a map of transformation. Jesus does not speak of taking away the world's burden, but of showing the soul how to carry its own light through the dark. He says, with a clarity that feels almost modern, "I do not suffer so that you need not suffer. I suffer to show you that suffering, when embraced with understanding, becomes the doorway to awakening. The weight of guilt is replaced by the fire of growth. In this Ethiopian tradition, the divine does not demand a sacrifice. It provides a mirror. The cross becomes a meeting place where human pain and divine awareness collide, dissolving the ego until only the spirit remains. It suggests that the path to the kingdom isn't paved with apologies, but with the courage to look at one's own brokenness and see it as the entry point for the light. It is a faith of expansion rather than contraction. Yet, it leaves us with an unsettling question that has echoed through the highlands for ages. Can a faith without guilt actually survive the world of men? In the dim, smoke-stained silence of the Gunda Gunde scriptorium, the manuscript reaches its most haunting inflection. It is here that the tone shifts from the tenderness of the inner kingdom to a chillingly precise prophecy of the future. The text records a moment where Jesus looks not at the disciples before him, but at the horizon of the centuries to come. He warns of a time when men will trade the fire of the Spirit for the cold weight of the stone. The words are a searing indictment of what Christianity was about to become. They will build towers of doctrine and call them faith, the parchment reads. But these towers shall only serve to cast shadows over the sun. These are the towers of doctrine, monolithic structures of law, hierarchy, and dogma, designed to contain a truth that was always meant to be free. The manuscript suggests that the greatest threat to his message would not be those who hated it, but those who would seek to manage it. He warns against those who claim absolute certainty over mysteries that are meant to be lived, not legislated. In this vision, the church becomes a fortress, protecting a treasure it has long since forgotten how to use. The text paints a picture of massive stone cathedrals rising like shadows, their stained glass beautiful, yet thick enough to obscure the very light they were built to celebrate. As the Roman Empire prepared to codify the Christ of power at Nicaea, this fugitive text was whispering a warning of the Christ of the heart. It asks us to consider if the institutions we have built are the very walls Jesus sought to tear down. If the kingdom is truly within, then every steeple is a distraction, and every creed is a cage. We are left to wonder, is the modern church the very institution he warned his disciples about? Through this warning, a final, simple truth emerges. In the final, fragile pages of the Gunda Gunde Codex, the complexities of theology begin to dissolve, melting away like winter snow under a high Ethiopian sun. Here, there are no instructions for the building of cathedrals, no hierarchical charts for the appointment of bishops, and no complex creeds meant to gatekeep the divine. Instead, the ink thins as if the scribe himself were weeping, recording a truth so simple it feels like a wound. Compassion is the only ritual. These ancient sentences suggest that the bridge between the human heart and the infinite is not paved with silver or stone, but with the quiet recognition of one soul in another. The manuscript strips away the heavy robes of institutional religion, revealing a Christ who speaks not of debt, but of presence. In this hidden gospel, the act of awakening, the sudden, shivering realization that you are already part of the divine fabric, is the only salvation required. It is an archaeology of the spirit, unearthing the version of faith that existed before it was harnessed by the machinery of empire. As the text draws to a close, a haunting question lingers in the cool air of the scriptorium. We have built empires of dogma and fought wars over definitions, yet we have ignored the light burning in our own marrow. We have perfected the theater of the sacred while forgetting its heartbeat. If the kingdom is truly an internal reality, and the only holy act is love, can we handle a God who requires no ritual other than the opening of our own hands. We have long looked at Ethiopia as a passive museum, a quiet attic where old things were left to gather dust. But the Gunda Gunde Manuscript demands a more dangerous interpretation. When Dr. Bizune squinted at the marginalia and the frantic precision of the Ge'ez script, a chilling reality set in. This codex was not merely preserved, it was smuggled. It did not drift into the highlands by the slow tides of trade. It fled there, a fugitive from a world that had suddenly become a graveyard for the spirit. To understand the weight of this leather satchel, we must look north, toward the marble halls of Nicaea in 325 CE. There, under the shadow of the Roman eagle, the wild, shimmering diversity of early Christianity was systematically dismantled. The Emperor Constantine needed a single god to lead a single empire, and so the Christ of power was born. Any scripture that spoke of a kingdom found within the self, rather than through the state-sanctioned priest, was branded as heresy. The order went out: find them, seize them, and let the fire consume the words that make men ungovernable. But the word has a way of seeking the heights. While the libraries of Alexandria and Rome were being purged of their mystical impurities, a small group of believers saw the smoke on the horizon. They recognized that the institutional church was no longer a vessel for the message, but a cage. They took the forbidden dialogues, the ones where Jesus spoke to Mary Magdalene as an equal, the ones where he claimed the temple was a shadow compared to the human soul, and they ran. They crossed the deserts, bypassed the imperial patrols, and climbed the vertical cliffs of Tigray. The Gunda Gunde Monastery was not just a place of prayer. It was a resistance cell for the original spirit. These monks were the guardians of a radical fire. For 17 centuries, they stood watch over a version of Jesus that the Western world was never supposed to see again. They were the keepers of the leak, holding on to a truth that suggests the greatest power on earth is not the crown or the creed, but the spark of divinity resting in your own marrow. This parchment is the fingerprint of a desperate survival. It is the evidence of a holy theft, a theft that saved the heartbeat of the faith from the cold hands of the Council. If this was saved, we must ask, what other heresies were buried alongside the Word, waiting for the earth to open? The search for the historical Jesus leads us away from the marble halls of power and back to the dust of the mountains. Here, the silence of the highlands has finally been broken, and the sound it makes is a collision of two worlds. For 17 centuries, we have lived in the shadow of the Christ of Empire, the king of a celestial hierarchy, used to justify crusades, build cathedrals, and enforce the laws of men. But the Gunda Gunde Manuscript demands we look upon a different face, the teacher of the inner kingdom. This is Ethiopia's great gift to the 21st century, a second chance to hear a message that was nearly silenced by the fires of the Fourth. The institutional weight of history has tried to convince us that the divine is a distant prize, guarded by gatekeepers and doctrine. Yet as the mountain peaks of Tigray seem to crack open to reveal a heart of solid gold, we see the reality that was buried under the floorboards of time. Survival was not an accident. It was an act of resistance. We stand now at the threshold of a great reimagining. The voice returning from the Ethiopian mist does not demand our submission. It demands our awakening. It tells us that the walls we build in the name of God are the very things that obscure the sun. It suggests that the mysticism of the ancients was never lost, only sheltered in the one place the reach of the Roman sword could not find. This conversation, 2,000 years in the making, begins anew. The question is no longer whether these words are real, but whether we are ready for the freedom they offer. Will humanity finally listen this time, or will we simply build new walls around the truth? The heavy goatskin cover of the Gunda Gunde Manuscript does not just hold ink and vellum. It holds a thread that has remained unbroken while the world outside fell to ruin and rose again in pride. This discovery in the Ethiopian highlands is not a mere archaeological curiosity. It is a mirror held up to the soul of a modern world that has forgotten how to be still. We have spent 2 millennia building cathedrals of stone and monuments of dogma. Yet the message recovered from the mountain silence suggests we were looking in the wrong direction all along. The Gunda Gunde Monastery remains one of the last places on earth where the 21st century has not yet fully arrived. To walk its stone corridors is to walk through the year 400 AD. There are chests in the deeper recesses of the complex, vaults that have not been opened since the Crusades, containing scrolls that may predate the very concept of a Bible. The monks guard these not as artifacts, but as living medicine for a sick world. The thread is in your hands now. Each line of this Ge'ez text is an invitation to perform a private archaeology of the heart. We have mapped the stars and decoded the genome, yet we remain strangers to the kingdom that breathes behind our own ribs. If the kingdom is truly an internal reality, and the only holy act is love, can we handle a God who requires no ritual other than the opening of our own hands? If you cast aside the doctrines and the noise, if you finally look within, what will you find staring back? The mountains have kept their secret for ages. The rest is up to you.